how would you describe your school experience?
Yeah. So I think our homeschooling experience was, I think every family's homeschooling experience is a little different. And ours was, I'm the eldest of 4 girls. And so I was homeschooled first. And I think initially my parents really homeschooled us because they, at the time, didn't want to send us to kind of the public schools where we were living. We were living in an area where they weren't particularly competitive or good public schools, and the private school options were too expensive. So our parents looked into homeschooling, and we knew one family who had sent their kids or had homeschooled their kids through high school. And my parents thought that they were decently successful and thought they'd try it out with us. And I think initially, I think all of our homeschooling experiences are slightly different, even amongst us siblings, because our parents, I think, iterated with the kids. So Safa can kind of expand on hers. But for me, I think initially my mother did a lot of hands-on work with me, especially through the first couple grades. So she'd sit down, we'd have a curriculum. You have to submit a curriculum every year to the county. So she'd kind of follow that. As the years went by, I was the eldest of 3 girls. So the younger ones started to need more attention. So we would kind of set up a Montessori style learning environment where everybody would be at the dining table. I'd help. My younger sister, she needed help with something. If Safa needed more attention, my mom would try to focus more attention on the younger ones. And I think eventually there came a time where we were all kind of free reigning it. I think once she taught us how to read and taught us basic math, it was like, okay, here are your books. This is what you need to get through. If you need help, come to me. And I think that for me, that started pretty early on. I would say 2nd, 3rd grade. So I think especially I was homeschooled till high school. I was homeschooled the longest out of all my siblings. And I think especially towards the latter years of my homeschooling experience, it was very unstructured, or there was no structure at all, really. The only thing we did do was Kumon, which is kind of a math and reading program. So I would say that's the only formal learning we were doing. But I think other than that, it was through the internet and reading for fun. And yeah, somehow it works out.
And so how old were you when you was it 9th grade when you entered into public school?
Yeah. So that was the first time I went to public school. I was partially enrolled just in 8th grade. The rule for Loudoun County is that you can, if you're homeschooled, you can go in and take a class if it gives you high school credits. So I was taking, I think, Spanish, and I was taking geometry. So I would go in just for those blocks once every day. And yeah, so 9th grade was the first time I had a fully immersive experience. And I think the reason why my parents decided to send me to school at that moment was, I think first I was at a point where I was really craving structure in my life. There was this kind of FOMO where I thought that the unstructured meant I hadn't really learned anything in my homeschooling experience, which I later found out was wrong once I actually got into public school. But also it's much easier applying to colleges if you go through a structured 4 years of high school.
So I'm going to sort of ask this question, but we may circle back around after Safa, after you get a chance to sort of explain yours. But as a point of reference, have either of you read the book Educated?
No, but it is on my.
Okay, so and I'm not assigning any homework, but my reading has come nearly to a halt since we've been at home because I have a long commute. So I do a ton of audiobooks and I listen to it, and it's incredible. But it's this young woman who never goes to school at all, and she lives with this sort of survivalist. The dad's very sort of paranoid. It's sort of a strange situation, but she decides essentially when she's probably would have been a junior in high school that she wants to go to college. So somewhere around junior, senior year, age-wise, she's like, I'm going to go to college. But she hadn't done any kind of schooling at all since she was elementary school age. And so it's an incredible story. But she ends up going to, she goes to Oxford, I think, or Cambridge, and she ends up at Harvard. And it's all this incredible stuff. But in it, she makes reference to how hard or easy it would be to get into college versus how you may be learning and not know you're learning or whatever else. And so with that experience of sort of jumping into school at the high school level, maybe a lot because you feel like you're missing something, is interesting. And again, I'm certainly not assigning a book or anything, but given your experience, that might actually be a cool one because you might find interesting points of both comparison and contrast. Before I sort of dig deeper on that, Safa, what was your experience like, since you are the 3rd out of 4 siblings? So you would have entered into, obviously the family, but entered into the schooling dynamic a little bit later on. So as things were maybe freeing up for Falak, were you still getting that structure, or was your homeschool experience sort of unstructured in that same way?
Yeah, mine was maybe more unstructured than Falak's, because once my mom had taught Falak everything Falak needed to know, it was kind of like almost Falak's responsibility to teach us. So like we would always go to her, like she would be our first resort whenever we needed help with anything. So I did partial enrollment in 7th grade, and then I did full-time school in 8th grade, because my dad was like, okay, Falak's been doing pretty well in school. Maybe it's time we like push Safa off a little bit earlier than usual. So in 8th grade, I had a tough time, not academically, because academically I was like, I really liked the structure, but I felt like I wasn't really like learning as much as I would have if I was like on my own. And that's when I finally realized it, because when I was in middle school, I kind of felt like it was like arts and crafts almost. And I was just following along, and I almost felt like it was self-explanatory, except Spanish, which was the only class I felt like I was learning a lot in. But other than that, I think socially was like the most difficult, because that's like, I think that's kind of a brutal time to enter school.
Yeah.
8th grade, everyone has all their friends, and I'm like kind of like the lone wolf, and I have to navigate trying to make friends. It's like a very like cliquey part. So.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, middle school, and I don't mean this offensively to any middle school teachers or anything, but I think of middle school as like a black hole. Like most kids are learning, I would like to think a lot, but at least learning some things through elementary school. And then you get to middle school, and like there's like a handful of kids that advance noticeably. I really like, you see so many high school freshmen show up. They're only marginally better than like smart 5th graders at so many things. And I mean, maybe some of that is because the social dynamics are so difficult, or maybe it's because the teachers are so cautious about pressuring the kids because they know the social stuff's so difficult. I don't know what it is, but middle school is both difficult socially and not always super productive academically. And so if that's your first experience entering into a public school, you really, you might be seeing the ugly side first, which, it's interesting that didn't deter you. Like, at any point, did you think about, for either of you, but especially starting in middle school, did either of you ever think about unenrolling from school and going back to homeschooling? Or did you ever have that conversation with your parents?
For us, that wasn't really an option, because I think we all knew we wanted to go to college. And we had some homeschooler friends that did like the 2-year community college route, which is generally what most homeschoolers do if they're homeschooled through college.
They'll graduate high school early, and so do 2 years of high school, finish the curriculum, and then go to college early, 2 years early.
So you essentially would enter college sort of at the same time as people your age, but you're already halfway through credits wise, or I mean, something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that.
I think so. I think my social experience going into high school was very different. I think I'm lucky in terms of with our high school, at least a lot of kids were going to different high schools. There were a lot of new kids. So I didn't necessarily have, I think, a difficult social experience. And I think for me, I was really just like relishing the fact that I had a teacher for every subject now, and I had the structure that I had craved for so long. And so I think for me, I don't think I ever went through any moments where I missed homeschooling. But I think in retrospect, looking back at my experience, I think my homeschooling in some ways set me up for success more than my public school experience. But I think at the end of the day, I was glad I was able to get the public school experience.
And I think if you ask most people when they're in school, and I do this all the time, and Safa, you do this in the class, like I try to be very honest about what's going on. Like, we're doing this because it's important, or we're doing this because we have to, or, if I know something's going to be miserable, but it's important, I open with, guys, this is going to suck, but here's what we got to do. And I try to make sure that I'm clear about it, because I understand that not everyone wants to be there, or that people have very different feelings about it. That being said, even a lot of people who in the middle of high school will tell you they are not enjoying it. If you talk to them later on, sometimes they will have a rosier sort of view of it. Sometimes you get the opposite. Sometimes people seem like they like high school just fine. And then you talk to them when they're, 22 or 24, and they're like, oh, it was awful. I hated all of it. It's like, no, I remember that. You didn't hate all of it. But thinking back, would you both say that you liked school? I mean, like, is it fair to say that you liked school, since you have a different point of comparison than, somebody who enters school when they're 5 years old? They don't really know anything else. So it's hard when they say, I don't like it, they don't know what they would like. So you at least have something else to compare to. do you like school in the traditional public school format?
For me, that's a heavier question. I think overall, in terms of my experience, I liked my experience, or at least parts of it. Was I happy with the way my educational experience was structured in terms of how our public education system is structured? I don't think so. I don't think I necessarily gained as much from it as I hoped I would have. Going into it, I was craving, I thought the structure and the fact that I would have had a teacher for every class and all that time, I thought would provide something more than it actually did. I think in some ways the education system is a lot about checking boxes. And there were some classes which I loved. They were taught in more of a Socratic method, where the teacher would, throw out a couple questions after teaching us some concept, and we were able to really get in small discussion groups. And I loved those kinds of classes. But I think for me, a lot of my classes were not that. So I think in retrospect, I have mixed feelings about the education part of it. I loved my social experience.